And that is why we're very interested in what you're doing, Ayesha. From the beginning, I started to read work, no? With Rodrigo, we realized that you were a really important person to invite to come to the conservatory, no? The way you're trying to combine post-colonial theory, basically ethnography, some of this, and the humanitarian governance is very important for us, no? So basically, thank you for being here. I don't want to talk too much. So basically, the idea that we have Ayesha today is that Laura is going to introduce you a little bit. Then you have your talk, and after that, we have a Q&A session, okay? So for now, Ayesha, thank you very much. Laura is going to introduce you, and just hope to continue conversations. And again, if we have questions and answers, the chat, people can write on the chat and all that. And at the end of the presentation, we'll have some space for question and answers. Again, Ayesha, muchas gracias.
Gracias. Thank you. Laura, are you there?
Laura? Okay.
Good morning. I'm here. Can you hear me and see me? I'm very sorry. I was actually, I don't know what happened with the video and the sound there. Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much, Dr. Ayesha, for being here with us. And my name is Laura Macias. I'm the research assistant for the Humanitarian Observatory. And as Professor Aparicio said, we are part of the ISS project called Humanitarian Governance, Accountability, Advocacy, and Alternatives. And on that line of thought, this is a space created for local, national, and international organizations to share their work, for communities and also for humanitarian actors to share their experiences, and for academics to share their research and their experiences as well. And the main idea that we have is to be able to discuss disaster, humanitarian intervention, and peace processes. We also want to have spaces to discuss and learn from each other and from each other's experiences, and to hear different perspectives, to create knowledge together, and also to create bigger and stronger networks. So today, this event is held by the observatory, answering to that, which is our main goal. And we have the pleasure, as we already said, to have Dr. Ayesha Siddiqi with us. Dr. Siddiqi is a post-colonial geographer whose research examines mainly how disaster risks are created, how they are produced, how they're lived, and how they're experienced, mainly in the margins of the post-colon. Currently, she's an assistant professor in human geography at Cambridge University, and among her many investigations, there are two very relevant ones for the context of the Latin America region. One of them was conducted on Peru, and the other one was actually here in Colombia, which we'll hear about in a second. The first one is called El Niño and Flash Floods in Peru, bringing knowledge on Furia de los Ríos and Western science to understand lag time. This investigation also led to an art exhibition called Furia de los Ríos, Sharing Experiences. And the exhibition was actually held on September, October this year, just a few months ago, at El Museo de Arte Contemporáneo de Lima, as part of the British Academy Knowledge Frontiers Award, which Professor Siddiqi was awarded with. And the second one is called Double Affectation, Living with Disasters and Conflict in Colombia. This second one was actually a report that was part of a bigger project called When Disasters and Conflict Collide, Uncovering the Truth. This was a collaboration between various institutions and the Overseas Development Institute. And it was actually a critical analysis of two recent disasters that happened here in Colombia. First one, a landslide in the Mocoa area in 2017. And the second one was a structural failure on a dam resulting in a severe flooding on the Cauca River back in 2018, not long ago. Well, the purpose of this event today is to have a space to learn about Professor Siddiqi's work and, well, as it is an ongoing investigation, right? It's an ongoing research, and to have a discussion on the matter, basically. So before we give the floor to Professor Siddiqi, real quick, as Professor Aparicio said, we'll just let you know a little bit about logistics today, which is very simple. First, Professor Siddiqi will share with us her research, and afterwards we'll have a space for questions and discussion. Well, once again, Professor, thank you very much for being here with us and for giving us the space to be able to learn from your research. The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that, both Laura and Juan. I'm not sure I'm worthy of quite all the nice things that you said, but thank you very much for the introductions. Can I just check if I do I have the rights to just share the screen for my PowerPoint? If I just click share screen, that should work, right? I don't.
Yes, it should. You should be able to.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're okay if I now put the slideshow on.
Yes.
Right. Thank you for inviting me to speak, and thank you for kind of giving me a chance to share a relatively kind of early version of a paper that I'm working on. This is explicitly kind of looking at some field work that we did in the wake of the landslide in Mocoa that I'm going to talk a little bit more about, and really trying to understand questions around how hazard risk is governed, and particularly kind of understandings of neoliberal governmentality in the context of the governance of hazard-related risk. So I don't think you necessarily need this. I've received quite a kind of good and comprehensive introduction, but I did want to highlight that rather than somebody whose expertise is on Latin America or Colombia, I'm really someone who works on disasters in the context of the global South, in the context of non-kind of Western societies. And I quite purposefully, but also in a way accidentally, ended up in Colombia, and that's the work that I'm going to be sharing today. And I'd be very grateful for your thoughts and your comments, because this is work in progress still. The field work was done, as we've mentioned, kind of in 2018, but then over the pandemic, etc., we weren't really able to move forward with it. So now I'm kind of revisiting some of the things that we explored then, and I'm in the kind of early stages of a draft paper right now. So what I would like to do in the next 30 minutes or so is tell you a little bit about where I'm heading in this paper, and what argument I'm trying to present here, and then really try and see if I'm successful at kind of arriving at that place. So really broadly speaking, in this paper, what I'm really trying to do is present a critique of a critique. And that kind of broad critique that already exists is that there are considerable literatures which are critiquing governance regimes which talk about disaster risk reduction as just another governance regime that is being used by structures in power to discipline populations, right? So there used to be all kinds of regimes of governing populations around health, around hygiene, around whatever. And now disaster risk reduction in the last kind of 20 years or so has become another one of those regimes through which people's lives are governed. So that kind of biopolitical lens on DRR has considerably and effectively been applied. But really, in my argument, I'm keen to problematize this critique because I think that it works in particular circumstances. And then in particular circumstances, there are a whole host of ontologies and cosmologies that it begins to kind of avoid or explain away. And I think that's where I begin to kind of take some kind of exception to this and say, is it really sensible to universalize disaster risk reduction as a regime of neoliberal governmentality, or is there kind of a little bit more here that needs to be explored? And the case that I want to use is the case of the landslide in Mocoa to talk about, where some of these problems have emerged. And really what I want to try and conclude with is suggesting that some of the ways in which some of the considerations which are often looked at as separate to or different from neoliberal governance are actually just manifestations and ways in which Juan used the word affective maps of neoliberal governmentality, and I think that's the direction that I'm kind of headed in with this work. So I apologize, it's probably all sounding quite abstract. So let me try and put a little bit of kind of specifics on this. So in Mocoa in 2017, there was this massive landslide. It was in March, April, 31st March, 1st April that that night kind of that the landslide kind of unfolded in 17 different barrios. And in 2018, in November, I did field work as part of a broader project in some of the worst kind of affected areas. And the background in these, particularly these 17 high altitude barrios where we know over upwards of 300 people died, was that a vast majority of people living in these areas were people who had been internally displaced. So they were people who had moved from the surrounding kind of Bajo Putumayo region, and they were people who already had a significant amount of showed or were susceptible or vulnerable to violence, and they had kind of moved to Mocoa. And when they moved, they were this was where they were able to afford land and where they were able to live, which was high risk. And they subsequently ended up being affected by this landslide. We did qualitative fieldwork here in 2018, primarily for a policy-based project for the ODI that I think Rodrigo was also involved in, and we were asking more kind of policy-based questions at the time around ways in which vulnerability to conflict and vulnerability to hazard risk kind of intersects. But in the doing of this fieldwork and in the meeting of people and in the qualitative kind of understanding of Mocoa and its geography and the impact of vulnerability, I became particularly more interested in the question of people who were repeatedly being considered responsible for the disaster. So we did community level interviews with people who had been affected by disasters. We also met the mayor and kind of did some policy-based interviews of people who were involved in government. And we also did interviews of other people who weren't directly involved in the disaster, but who kind of lived around the area. So it was quite a local level, within these 2-3 barriers that we were doing this field work. And almost universally across the board, whether we spoke to people in government or whether we spoke to people who were affected by the disaster or whether we spoke to people who had only witnessed the disaster, almost across the board, everyone said that people were responsible for their own or for inviting this disaster in. So they were responsible either because they were aware of the fact that this was a risky area and they chose to live here anyway, or they were responsible because they paid people for land titles where there should have been no land titles, or they were responsible because there was a moral failing of these people, right, of the internally displaced for drinking and gambling all day, or sometimes people were themselves saying that we are responsible because this quote from "they build and build and build" was actually somebody who was who had been through significant kind of violence in the Bajo region and had moved to Mocoa and had built a house and had like rebuilt her life and then had everything destroyed, and somehow even she had internalized this idea that it was their own fault for building and building and building. So really across the board, what I was repeatedly encountering and even talking to amongst the team was that there is a real sense of the individuals are to blame. It is their responsibility for this catastrophic disaster that kind of destroyed their homes, right, and their lives, and large number of casualties in the hundreds of people. So obviously, a lot of the neoliberal governmentality and the way that vulnerability to hazard risk is considered is that within this neoliberal world, it is increasingly considered the individual's responsibility to make kind of rational, adequate choices with regards to managing their own risk. And if the individual makes irrational or kind of bad choices, then that becomes something that is subject or that is considered irresponsible behavior. And the state has very kind of actively and deliberately put this regime of control into place where people are responsible for making active choices around risk that keep them safe. And this is something that in the paper I discuss quite a lot of, provide quite a lot of more kind of evidence for, which I won't go into here, various kind of acts of government in Colombia, various kind of ports and legislation. They all have subsequently declared that people have to make responsible and rational choices and manage their risk well, right? So it's really the state is using that kind of language of making people responsible. So we know that is the way that hazard risk in this kind of neoliberal world is understood. And authors, particularly, I think in the case of Colombia, someone like Austin Zitterman is particularly important because this fairly extensive ethnographic work that he does on Bogota, he says, and he shows exactly how that risk has been through neoliberal governance kind of individualized and put on the shoulders of regular individual people, right? So that's how it's, one could say that people are just echoing what regimes of control they have been put in place. That's why everyone says that these people knew it was risky, because these are the governance systems and structures that they are being managed by, this population is being managed by. But actually, what is quite interesting in the case of the fieldwork that we did is that, yes, there were kind of government officials who were saying these kinds of things. There were also people who were quoting different government acts, etc., UNGRD and the various agencies involved in managing risk and things like that. But we were quite kind of interested in just the ways in which this narrative was also coming from ontologies and cosmologies around kind of faith and religion and Christianity and indigenous beliefs. And that's where I think this whole question of making things or universalizing things as neoliberal governmentality begins to get a bit more problematic, right? So, for example, what we heard from someone who I've given the pseudonym Gloria to is that this is very much what was written in the holy texts, and she's able to quote the Bible at great length and to say that this is exactly as we know in our belief and in our faith system that people who live in debauchery, they end up in kind of these scenarios where they're experiencing the wrath of the earth and of the climate and of in other ways of God, right? And that these social problems that these people created fully kind of fits in with her faith-based narrative of how and what she has learned and understood through her through her understanding of faith and of Christianity. And there is even recognition of this when we talk to kind of younger people who say that they have come across this, that this is a very Catholic topic, that people say, of course, this has happened because this was holy punishment and all of that. So there's kind of widespread recognition that actually this individualizing of responsibility of considering very, very marginalized people who've been kind of experiencing prolonged violence for long periods of time have now moved to Mocoa in search of a slightly better life, barely made it there, and then have been hit with this catastrophic disaster. But of course, it's their fault because that's what the faith-based understanding of this issue is, really marginalizing the most marginalized, almost in some ways. And whereas, of course, we heard this coming out often or regularly from people who were referring to Catholicism, we also heard this from a number of people who kind of had more indigenous belief systems, and they said that we know this from our elders and from the belief systems that we follow, that these displaced people, they were living in very disorganized ways. They didn't respect our spirituality and our spiritual practices. So there are even non-Catholic narratives, but faith-based ones or belief-based ones that say it is definitely the fault of these subaltern kind of marginalized subjects for bringing this disaster on them. So in all of this, what we begin to see is that religion, God, cosmic beliefs, etc., they're playing a very specific role, right? So they're not just being used to kind of help people cope with the loss or with a particular kind of devastation, but really to identify a group of individuals who are morally failing or who have made bad decisions or bad choices. And that's why they've suffered as a consequence of this disaster. It's a very kind of specific way in which religion and kind of ontological, cosmological beliefs are being used in the context of individual responsibility and blame being attributed to these people. And what we begin to see here, or here is where I'm really kind of working through the part that I'm really working through in my own thinking, in my reading, etc., is that, of course, this landslide doesn't have one fixed ontological meaning, right? Society creates meaning of things like disasters, but we don't just pick these meanings out of a hat, right? Individuals are not entirely kind of free of all kind of social and cultural, etc., cues and constructions. And so it does depend quite a lot on the kind of sociocultural, cosmological ways of knowing the world. And what I see happening in the context of Mokoa is that neoliberal governmentality is really interacting and speaking to a whole range of different ontological positions, and in a really disturbing way, even naturalizing this as religious belief. But of course, this makes sense. We know from our religious belief that individuals who do this, they're going to suffer, right? So it's making it almost seem natural, and it's naturalizing a particular understanding, a particular kind of meaning making within society. So really, where I see my paper going, or where I see this intervention going, is that I agree with Austin Zitterman's assertion. This is from his book on Shaky Ground, where he says that the experience of liberal modernity in Europe and North America is not necessarily the best guide for understanding the government of risk in other parts of the world, right? So obviously something is happening in Mokoa in a very kind of non-Western, North American, European context. But then I also find myself diverging from the way that he's thinking, because what he's suggesting, what he goes on to suggest in his work, is that things like religion or patronage, etc., are different rationalities of rule, or other rationalities of rule. And where I see myself going is that they need to be recognized as other manifestations of neoliberal governance, rather than making them other rationalities that people are also using, or that structures are also using, because I think that becomes a lot more problematic. These non-modern people and their other rationalities of rule and their religions and their cosmological beliefs make them blame the victim, or make them. I think that's a slightly more, or I find myself finding that a slightly more problematic assertion to make. Whereas what seems to me my data is suggesting is that this is one of the ways in which neoliberal governance of risk is reproducing these very localized conditions of extreme marginality. So I think what I'm going to kind of conclude with, really, this is the last of my slides, is that of course we recognize that within disaster studies there is a real need to flatten epistemologies, right? The whole idea of Enlightenment thinking, of particular Western liberal frameworks, has been so naturalized and so kind of pervasive across this field, or this area of study. But really what the critiques from the margins that I've been exploring is suggesting is that individualizing responsibility for disasters it shouldn't just be seen as one kind of universal or totalitizing monolith known as neoliberal governmentality. There are different ways in which this is being reproduced, this is being manifested, this is interacting with other ontological, cosmological beliefs. And I think getting a better sense of the ways in which it interacts with, non-Western, non-European understandings of the world needs to be much more centered and much more kind of central to the kinds of questions we're asking around disasters, particularly in the global South. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Siddiqi, for this incredible investigation. So we're right now open the floor for any questions you have on the chat. You guys have on the chat. We didn't have any questions on the talk while you were presenting the investigation. So please, everyone, you can feel free to leave your questions on the chat, or you can raise your hand and we can talk. As we said, this is a space that we don't want it to be very formal. We want to just kind of talk and throw the ideas on the table.
I want to jump in. Okay, thank you, Ayesha. Thank you very much. A lot of questions, a lot of like interesting materials, that you have been working with, we just published a book last year, a compilation that's called Neoliberalism in Colombia, And one of the things that we're trying to do from a theoretical, but from a methodological point of view, is precisely to see how neoliberalism, what does it mean, neoliberalism, in the context of Colombia, We more or less follow the argument of Verónica Gago from Argentina, which she refers the neoliberalism from above, thinking about financial markets, all these kind of things that we know about this, But also she connects that also what you call the neoliberalism from below, which in a way sounds very similar to what you're doing. I mean, she says that, look, of course, this homo economicus, this rationality of Foucaultian subject in neoliberal subject, of course, that is made very much with the financial markets, with the debt and all that, But there's also a way in which, let's say, in the popular economies, in the moral economies, people are always rationalizing, They're also like thinking about profits and all this. That does not only have to do with markets and all this, So I want to start the conversation like, how do you feel with the idea of what you're thinking here is more or less with the line of thinking neoliberalism from below, just from start with that. Does it make sense? Is it enough or more or less? And what do we do with that? Then.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you for that kind of intervention and the comments. I mean, as you're probably aware, we've talked about this in the past. I completely kind of recognize how neoliberalism from below is really the framework that I'm engaging with, right? And that also with neoliberalism from below, it becomes much less about what kind of output will be produced, because you don't know what kind of output will be produced. You just have put all these kind of rationalities or technicalities or whatever on the top, and then how people live them and exchange with them and what emerges really it is something that the structures on top don't really have control over. And I think that's the that's the element that excites me also, but that also I think isn't always fully understood. So I came at this research very much from, in fact, I think in one of our previous exchanges, you asked me what I mean by post-colonial. And I mean very much this idea of the subaltern, that to my mind, people who are so marginalized, they're already marginalized in society, kind of living in situations of real kind of active everyday difficulty through conflict, through armed violence, etc. And then they rebuild their life and they're marginalized there, and then they're marginalized further by being like, but actually this was all your fault. It's just like the real depth of marginalization. And the reason why I became interested in this question was because I heard within the people we were working with a little bit of this, patronizing element of, of course, these poor people are going to blame the poorest, or, of course, that the post-colonial subject, the subaltern, is not even able to then show any empathy. They are even devoid of all empathy. They are entirely blaming this on the poorest of the poor. And I was like, to my mind, that just didn't resonate. There has to be a breakdown of why the subaltern or some subalterns, including those who were experiencing this disaster, arrived at that point, right, where they're accepting all of this blame, where they're accepting all of this responsibility. And what are the ways that we can kind of break that down or break that apart or kind of unpack that to understand how these forms of or these conditions of subalternity are being created. And of course, the risk governance regime is really big, but also that there's a neoliberalism from below that we couldn't really control, that no one could really. It just has a life of its own, right? And in the way that it is interacting with people's belief systems and their ontological positions and their life experiences and all of that, I don't think anyone can determine what the output of that would be.
Excellent. Rod,
Professor
go
Mena?
ahead, Rod.
Yeah. First of all, thanks, Ayesha. It's, as you said, I have heard about this, but not these details, and it was really, really nice to hear it. I have a question, actually. I'm really struggling on how to phrase it, so I'm not sure how it's going to come across. But so bear with me. It's clear that there is this kind of blaming over them, and and this like of victimizing them and making them, responsible for it. And my question that I'm not sure how to place it, but it's that, have you seen any of those people afectados? I'm not saying, I'm trying to say this carefully, that's why I'm trying how to say it, but also owning that role as victims, or owning this role as responsible, as a way of agency, maybe to get something else. Because in other crises, we have seen this idea of, that some authors among them, Te and others, have been talking about, the idea of victimancy. So yeah, they're imposing this for us, on us, but it might be possible, I don't know exactly how to phrase it, that people say, well, if this is reality, how do act with our own agency on this reality to at least make the most of it? I don't know if that came across more or less what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's a really good question. And I think, of course, this is why I try quite a lot to not use the word victim, because
exactly I could notice that
it's quite a kind of loaded but also problematic kind of way of framing, because of course people have agency, right? And it's absolutely possible that people are using this label in different ways or in different negotiations and points as of bargaining and of all of that is happening. But whereas I would absolutely kind of recognize that and say that people rarely ever only have one frame of reference, right? So when people own it and say, yes, we are responsible, but we are also victim, right? So that both things can hold true. I think that the bigger point that that I'm wrestling with in this intervention, in this paper, around how people's religious or cosmological beliefs are not something other than neoliberal governmentality, but are entirely kind of subsumed or entirely kind of interacting. I think that still holds, because even though they are accepting responsibility, what is the kind of mental framework or or lived experience that they are using to express that agency, right? And that mental framework, or that way of rationalize, or I don't even want to use the term rationalize, but that way of kind of connecting with this is entirely from is entirely in ways that also demonstrate a particular a kind of individual responsibility. So I want to say that they're holding both of those things, but how they're claiming that there is individual responsibility here is really what is of interest here, that they can find that individual responsibility as connecting to, you know, Catholic religious practices or indigenous religious, or really any, and it all becomes a wider negotiation with the way that neoliberal governmentality begins to unfold.
Right, thanks. Yeah, I mean, in recent research, I have been using a concept that we all know, that is the idea of making sense. And for me, that was really important, because of, it's not that people one day receive a memo, you know,
Yes.
now this is the scheme happening. So there is a lot of confusion at the same time, you know, all these kind of things are evolving. And although now we can see that these are neoliberal agendas or so, it's not really an agenda. I mean, in the sense that no one is really writing that I want to do it in this way.
Absolutely.
So the idea of making sense for me is really important. How people make sense of this reality, how they interpreted them, how they, okay, what is happening? How people is seeing me? How do I see myself here? How can I act under these frameworks?
Totally.
So yeah, making sense is not a theoretical construct or concept itself, but it's, for me, having opening more options than the idea of rationalize, you know, because it's not really rational. Making sense is also emotional. It's really, you know, this idea of feminist approaches of how to really trying to, make sense, bring some level of understanding and on these realities that it seems imposed to us, but we're also part of them.
Thank you, Rod.
Thanks so much. I can see some questions on the chat, and I think Juan Ricardo had to step out briefly, but maybe I can support. Or Laura, you want to take over?
Yes, yes, of course. I had a question first, or something on the line of where you were going, because you were talking about the way people make sense, and your investigation actually made me think about Michael Tausig's investigation about the devil and commodity fetishism in South America, were people that were being actually caught by these logics of neoliberalism and agro-industrial industries, were actually trying to make sense of the situation, talking about deals with the devil, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So it's actually very similar to another work of another teacher of the University of Los Andes, Juan Camilo Niño, that works actually with a community called Dietes. And they're actually in a very similar situation within risk and conflict. And they were actually trying to make sense of it, as saying that we've done so much wrong that the world will end. And actually we are living it. And we have to take responsibility for it. And we basically, this is just the way, the path, right? And we have to go through with it. So it's really interesting when this economic logics that we go with, right? The market. meet these other ontological ways of looking at the world and living the world, and epistemological ways of trying to make sense of the world in a different way in which, we are responsible. And it's basically what we've done. That's coming back to us.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting the way those two converge. And well, Professor Juan Ricardo, you raised your hand, and I'll go ahead and read after you the questions we have in the chat.
Can I just ask you, Laura, what is the name of the professor you mentioned at Los Andes who works on?
He's called Juan Camilo Niño.
Okay.
And he's working with a community called ETE, the ETEs. If you want to, I'll go ahead and send you an email or on the chat.
Thank you.
Professor Aparicio?
Maybe we can take the questions in the...
Let's take them, yeah. So Camila Vargas says subalterns are also a lived experience. What about solidarity? She's asking. And would these other cosmologies offer different support mechanisms for these affected communities?
Yes, this is a really good question, and actually gets to the heart of why I was particularly interested. I don't have an answer for Camilla's question, but I can, like all good social scientists, kind of respond to this question with more questions and say that because of this question of solidarity, right, that we're talking to people who are often extremely kind of devastated because of all the loss that they've experienced, first because of the conflict, then because of the landslide, etc. And we amongst ourselves, the research team starts to say that there's something that's quite fractured. There's quite limited kind of solidarity, right? And we know, for example, in research on neoliberal governmentality, particularly from below or in communities on the ground, that the whole role is to fracture solidarity. That's what it's supposed to do. And really, because we were quite concerned about this idea that, oh, these poor people, they're all just turning on each other rather than demonstrating any kind of solidarity. And because of those kind of overarching narratives that were being quite disparaging of people who were considering individual responsibility, and because of those factors was really the reason that we got interested in this question, and that resulted in the direction of this particular research. And would it offer different support mechanisms for the affected? I mean, I think in some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. Also, I think it's quite a kind of depends who you ask. Yes, people do say that in the aftermath of the disaster, having faith-based cosmological beliefs and all of that, it has been something they've relied on. They've rebuilt the church in the place that a lot of the people were relocated to out of Juanico. So in some cases, yes, but in other cases, like the ethnographies that I shared with you, the other cosmologies were just used to blame and consider other people responsible for this disaster. So it really depends on who you have that conversation about support with.
Great. We also have Peter De Vries requesting to make a comment.
Sure.
Professor, the floor is yours.
Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ayesha. I like very much this take on disasters and the post-colonial perspective you are using, because it resonates very much with the research we are doing now in the Chocó in Colombia. It's I mean, the question you are posing is Spivaks, can the subaltern speak? And the answer is actually no. I mean, the subaltern speaks through the language of the dominant classes.
Yes.
And in Colombia, I mean, the dominant classes are very much the church and very much the elites and very much what you call neoliberal governmentality, but it's not new. It is very old. So this idea of blaming yourself or blaming the neighbor, it's a very Catholic idea. What I think is important and also very interesting is that this whole tendency in rational analysis, but also in governmentality analysis, it is very rational. It is about how people adopt a certain subjectivity and act according to it. With Ilan Kapoor, I don't know whether you know the name, but he has written a lot also on development from a post-colonial perspective. We have written a book and we have finished an article, which is exactly about the situation of the Chocó and the role of theology, liberation theology in mobilizing people in an emancipatory way. What is fascinating in this case is that, I mean, it takes place, I mean, the plane or the level in which it takes place is that of spirituality. I mean, it is not about rationalizing things, but it is about, I mean, the management of emotions or affects, if you want to use that word, in order to create a consciousness which is basically the consciousness of the subaltern. And we are using psychoanalysis for that purpose. I mean, which is you could say very modernist discourse. But the interesting thing of psychoanalysis is that it looks at processes such as drive and desire and the ways in which it is used by dominant classes, systems in order to degrade, but also, yes, dominate, but also the way in which it can be used for emancipatory purposes. Okay, that was a comment I wanted to do. But I very much sympathize with your take on governmentality.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'm going to look up your work and also the research that you're talking about. Thank you.
Laura Victoria Alzate.
Yes, thank you, Laura. Hello, everyone. My name is Laura Victoria Alzate. I'm part of a national NGO. There is Fundación Halu. Thank you very much, Ayesha, for your presentation. It was very interesting. I was wondering if you, through your research, had the chance to speak also with different NGO organizations or organizations that are charged with the humanitarian response. Because I was thinking if you could speak to me a little bit more about these specific questions with these entities regarding the role that we can play, such a response, but not only response, but also the change of mentality, where you don't just victimize or re-victimize, as Rodrigo said, people and making them feel, I don't know, guilt, making them responsible for their own suffering, but trying to make some change. I mean, me from Fundación Halo, I'm wondering about this role that we can play in this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question, Laura. If it is helpful at all, the kind of more policy-related recommendations and kind of ideas are in the report that we wrote for ODI. So it's in the public domain. If you just kind of type disaster conflict Colombia ODI paper, I think you'll come across it. I think that to present a very kind of straightforward response to your question of, what is the role that the humanitarian or that NGOs can play in this kind of context beyond, or that will not victimize people further, based on our research. A lot of what we were doing and ended up being quite a large part of the report that we wrote was that the policy landscape was incredibly difficult for regular people to navigate, right? So they were, of course, part of the repatriations, or they had to be signed up for the repatriations for the armed victims unit, but they also had to navigate the UNGRD kind of disaster agencies response intervention after the landslide. And then there was also confusion about if you've already received one intervention from the government, from the UNARV, then you can't receive it again from the UNGRD, right? So the just incredibly complex landscape that they were having to navigate, and at some points you even felt a little bit sorry for the government, because the government also was having to navigate a particularly kind of complex context and scenario. But for regular people, just kind of signing up to the right thing to receive the right kind of compensation from the right agency at the right time was such an incredibly difficult context. And even after that, it was unclear why some people were then relocated. Some people from settlements like Juanico were relocated, and there was a new settlement with 3 new houses built, and some people got a house there, and it was not clear to those who didn't get a house why they didn't get a house. Did they register at the wrong time with the navigating of this incredibly complex bureaucracy and the timelines associated for, because you had to sign up for the armed conflict repatriation within a particular timeline, but for the landslide there was no timeline. As long as the bureaucracy around this was so kind of intense that if I had to come up with kind of one very clear intervention for NGOs or humanitarian agencies, I think it would be around looking at ways in which this really complex architecture of reparation and disaster relief could be really simplified to make people's lives a little bit easier.
Thank you, Ayesha. Thank you very much.
And I guess the second big argument, Ayesha, I mean, you're really fascinating because in a way you're saying, look, my research more or less shows me that what I want them to think, is not what they're thinking, in the sense that we want them to really to identify the monster, to talk about domination, and they're not doing that. I was going to say, look, it is my fault. No.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's fascinating, because what do we do with that? In terms of Laura Victoria, what policy implementation are you going to have when the affected are saying, look, this is our fault? No. I mean, that is a really fascinating, difficult, complex, contradictory conclusion.
Yeah.
And again, the second thing that I think Ayesha is inviting us is something that Rodrigo is always saying. Look, we have to do much more fine, detailed, everyday life contextual research. No. I think that is the big thing here. No, and what happens is once you do that, you find the kind of narratives that Ayesha is finding. No, what do you do with that? No. When people are blaming themselves for what is happening, no.
Yeah.
So like, what do we do with this, Peter? I mean, does liberation theology help us here? No. Does these leftist academics that really are the ones who are diagnosing this new primitive accumulation of this, including myself in that bunch of people, no, are not the only are not responsible? No. What do we with this? No. I mean, this is just fascinating. No. How do we with this? How do we think about publish again? No, when people were defecting and say, "Oh, look, what this is our fault."
Yeah.
It's fascinating. I really just thank you much, because I think that is. I mean, really, I don't know what to do with that. No, really difficult. Rodrigo, Gabriela, Camila, Eduardo, Vladimir, Fernando. I mean, everyone knows what to do with it. When the affected are saying, look, so we just come up with the usual leftist intellectuals and look, what you basically you don't know, but I know. No?
Yeah.
I am the one who knows that you are being the famous argument of Marx and the false consciousness. No,
Yes.
that you're being set up. I am the one who knows. So let me instruct you. Let me show you what is happening. No. So it's difficult. I don't know what to do, really. If someone helps me,
Thank you.
I don't know what.
No, I want to say that this has been really enlightening for me. I don't think that anyone here got as much out of this conversation as I did, because there's so many kind of new ideas that I'm going to be thinking about. And to just kind of because I'm going to have to run very soon. So just to kind of conclude with the question that you were asking, Juan, but this was exactly what motivated me to want to write this or to ask this question in this research, because I thought to myself that there's something really off here, right? In the way that everyone is individualizing responsibility, and the individuals are also accepting that there's something really kind of and it is about trying to present the unpacking of, when you start to unpack and kind of open the layers of the onion, where does what is at the core, and what is at the core, I think, for me, is that we need to stop saying that people are backwards and they have these backwards ideas or whatever, and rather recognize how these narratives become so powerful. So that's the kind of space within which I'm going to take the paper. And all of what you said, Rodrigo saying there's maybe even a conceptual argument around making sense, the art of making sense. How do people make sense of things? And what you said about affective maps, and what Peter said about liberation theology. I think there's a lot that I've gotten out of this discussion. Thank you so much for hosting me. Thank you so much for having me here. And I'm very sorry to cut the conversation short. I now have a school run, so I need to run towards the school.
No, don't worry, Professor Siddiqi. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure for all of us. I know Rodrigo wants to say something, so I'll give you the word. But once again, it was a pleasure and very enriching for every one of us.
No, I was opening my mic just to say thanks so much. But also to you, Laura, and Juan Ricardo, for hosting, and for everyone who is participating here to be us. So yeah, thanks everyone. It was really nice.
Okay. Thank you, Ayesha. The rest, please stay in the radar of the observatory. We're going to have several talks and events during the year. We have our own website that you can visit and know about us. It's very much about knowledge production. It's also very much about research, but it's also very much how to connect research with public policy debates and actions. No, we don't have the solutions. we don't have the way to handle this. But at least 2 words, I think, that really define our way of thinking about this is complexity, no, and context, no. So very much, thank you much. I know it is late, at least for us, for many of us. So thank you much. Okay, bye bye.
Thank you everyone. Bye.
Thank you all for coming.
Jimmy,
Bye,
Laura,
everyone.
thank you very much from the
Muchas gracias.
Consensus. Gracias.